To find your seats, we'll kind of recap Daniel 9 thus far. If you were here our last class, we made it through what I think is kind of the most important parts of Daniel as far as being applicable to us. And well, I won't say importance. How about that? My favorite parts of Daniel 9 in Daniel's intercession for the people, his prayer to God where he confesses the sins of the people, himself. What do you remember as standing out being kind of important or very interesting about his prayer?
Public shame. He
Okay.
that him himself, the leaders, the kings, the people of the land, all deserve their public shame. And he is clearly recalling Deuteronomy 28, because he says, the curse that you promised came upon us.
Absolutely. So yeah, he is ashamed and is shamed for the people, and he includes himself as one of these people. Even though we know Daniel probably is not this real bad sinner like all these people he's kind of representing, but he stands among his people in this intercession. We noted it sounds a lot like Moses' intercession for the people. He really stands in the gap in this way and throws his fate in with the fate of his people. So much of this prayer, God is promoting God's righteousness and their sinfulness, and ultimately asking that God would, for His name's sake, do as He had promised. And bring His people back, restore His people, about restoring righteousness to His people, restoring them to their city, to Jerusalem, and restoring the sanctuary that bears His name. And then what happens? He's in the middle of talking still, and what happens? Yeah, Gabriel comes and brings an answer. While he was still speaking and praying and confessing the sin of my people, Gabriel comes and says that actually at the beginning of his plea, he left. And that he just got there, pretty much. And so he brings this answer. So it's important as we jump in here to the end of chapter 9, recognizing that this is an answer specifically to Daniel's plea to God. And so he's going to come and bring him understanding. Verse 22, he made me understand, speaking with me and saying, "O Daniel, I have now come to give you insight and understanding." So that's the backdrop of what we're getting into today with this prophecy of 70 weeks that we'll get into now. Now, I'll just tell you, sometimes you hear that kind of statement, and we're deep into Daniel. And if you're like me, your eyes kind of glaze over and you're like, probably not going to get this anyway. Stick with it. I think it may be clearer than it might have been made to you in the past. I definitely grappled with it some, but there's a lot to be gained out of this for us. We're going to spend just a little bit of time fleshing the rest of 9 out here, and then go ahead and spend the bulk of our time in chapter 10. Before we read this last section in 24 down through the end of the chapter, I want to just kind of go through a few keys to understanding this prophecy. Okay, it says 3, and I added a 4th, and I forgot to change it to say 4. But anyway, so recognizing the context, it being Daniel's prayer. So much of it is going to connect back to answering specific things out of his prayer. And then keeping the 6 goals of the 70 weeks in mind. I like to think of these 6 goals as the prophecy. And then he gives some details about what's going to happen. But this reassurance that these things are going to happen in these 6 things that he brings out about it. And then just the numeric symbolism of 70 weeks. We aren't going to get bogged down in trying to make it fit perfectly exactly to the number of years, but rather the symbolism of why he chooses this number. And then how it can play out approximately and along with that symbol. And with that, just recognizing the pattern of prophecy is really much more important than the precision of exact years and exact times. And also recognizing the pattern of prophecy can kind of repeat. This is something that we can expect to see as a pattern to happen maybe again in history. And as we look at the history of God's people going forward. So let's go ahead and get into it here. We'll actually just go ahead and pick up with verse 24. Somebody read for us 24 down through the end of the chapter. Tell me what, and say what version you're reading from first too.
I'll read from the NIV.
Great.
77s are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atonement for wickedness, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Know and understand this. From the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble, after the 62 sevens, the anointed one will be put to death and will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering, and at the temple he will set up an abomination that causes desolation until the end that is decreed is poured out on him.
All righty. So let's dive right into this. What is this decree that is made from Gabriel? Well, yes. So that's going to be kind of a potential beginning time stamp here. But the decree that Gabriel is giving is 24 70 weeks or 77s are decreed about your people and your holy city. So what is this 77s? In the context here, what does that mean? 77s or 70 weeks? What might that represent?
7 generally means complete.
Okay, 7 is a complete number, right? In the context even of Daniel's prayer, what is 70? What's that? What is that number from Daniel's prayer, and what's been going on here? Remember, we're at the end of an exile, which was how long? 70 years, right? Which was what was prophesied by Jeremiah. So we're in we're at the very beginning of that. Remember, that's the backdrop of why he's praying. You say, okay, Babylon has fallen. So that should mean that we are coming to this time, and in mentioning that 70 weeks prophecy. And so then the angel Gabriel is saying, hey, there are actually 70 weeks that are still left to 77s, if you will. There's another even greater period of time that is still decreed about your people for the rest of these things to happen. What else? What other idea is there in the number 7 for the Jews? Okay, perfection. Think creation. What happens in creation, right? We have 6 days of creation. On the 7th day, the rest. So what is the 7th day? The Sabbath day, right? So remember back from kind of like the end of Chronicles, right? We have this idea that pretty much for these pretty much 70, there were 70 Sabbath years yet to be had that the land was going to rest with the people out of the land, right? Which means that if there is supposed to be a Sabbath year every 7 years and there's 70 to make up, that means there's 490 years of rebellion where the land did not have its Sabbath rest, which is why they were taken out of the land for 70 years, right? So that's the sense of weeks here, sevens. These are Sabbath year cycles. Remember every 7 years, the land was supposed to go back to its original owners. Your slaves were supposed to go free. All of this idea. And so, it's been resting for 70 years to make up for this 490 years that has happened. But now he's saying, okay, there's more to come, right? To ultimately bring these things to their full accomplishment. So what is decreed for them, I guess what is going to play out is another 490-year period then, right? If you take 7 times 70. And again, this connects to Daniel's prayer. And know also what this is about, not just for the people, but for the holy city. Which Daniel is making reference to, and especially the sanctuary there in Jerusalem. So before we get into this further, as we get into it further, what are the purposes of this 70 weeks? What is to be accomplished in these 70 weeks? We kind of have 6 statements made, and before we say them, we'll go ahead and categorize these. You've got the first 3 are dealing with the problems that Daniel is addressing in his prayer, right? The sin of the people, right? And how is that going to get dealt with? That he's confessed these sins. How is God going to deal with the sin? And then there's the second 3 are going to have to do with this positive fulfillment of God's promises that have not come to fruition yet. That these people in Daniel would be seeking to come to fruition in this time period. So what are those 6 statements that you see? What's the first one? Yeah, to finish the transgression. So what's that mean? Kind of an odd statement.
Fill out the time that they were supposed to spend in captivity.
Okay, so kind of fill the. Kind of like the punishment for the transgression in a way, to complete their time of transgression, maybe even. And if you look at the idea like we've been studying in Corinthians, you may have this idea of putting away transgression, of the getting rid of it, just like we saw in I said Corinthians, I meant to say Colossians. In our Colossians class right now, where we see our sins being nailed to the cross and Jesus reconciling all things in himself. Both could be ideas that are kind of held here. What's our next one? Yeah, so to put an end to sin. That one's a little bit more clear to us, right? Put an end to sin. So this may be even kind of a furthering of that same idea and finishing the transgression. This kind of idea of the sway that sin has over us. What he is prophesying here is for the point of making an end to sin among these people. What's our third? Yeah, so another analogy to atone for sin or atone for iniquity. What is that atonement idea saying? Atonement is kind of a very churchy word, but and actually one that's very hard to translate the gist of it to us.
Sacrifices for their atonement.
Yes, in order to make atonement, exactly. So sacrifices had to be made to atone for sin. We know that that's the case. So whatever he's prophesying about here is for the ultimate ends of atoning for the sin of the people. Another image of kind of how justification of his people is going to happen. What does atonement literally mean? More literally. This is a kind of redemption idea there. To cover, right? So to make covering for sin. The mercy seat is actually literally translated atonement cover thing. So to make atonement for sin, exactly. And we recognize that's going to be connecting to this idea of sacrifice. So then in the second set of these, it's kind of to fulfill God's purposes and his promises, to bring in everlasting righteousness. So, what's that sound like? When would that come? Yeah, in Jesus, absolutely, and everything that he is going to do. What's our fifth one here? Okay, what does that mean? What could that mean? To seal up vision and prophecy. Yeah, exactly. I think there's that idea there of really full completion of prophecy, right? Not even just this one here, but of all of this. He's like, hey, Daniel, you are looking toward the completion of this specific time period, getting back to the land and that. But we're going to be talking about something that is even greater than that. Sealing up kind of all vision and prophecy, completing that in what he's going to be telling them about. And then what's our final one?
To anoint the most holy place, mine says, but then it says in a note, for the most holy one.
Yeah, okay, so to anoint a most holy place or the most holy place, it's kind of, the place word is kind of ambiguous. It could be thing or one. So there are a couple different ways you can take it. Most translations do say most holy place. I think that's fair to go off of, but though there's obvious ways we could apply it if we're saying most holy one. But this kind of also answers Daniel's questions about getting back to the sanctuary. But as we're going to see in this is going to look a little bit different than just the most holy place that we're used to seeing, talking about. Yeah, Byron.
Is this, in Hebrews 9, it talks about that Christ went into the true holy place with his blood. And then the heavenly things had to be purified with better sacrifices than these. So, is that it?
Yeah, so I think, we're jumping ahead in this here, but that's exactly right. So what we're going to see is this maybe is not necessarily, the end of this isn't maybe a temple or in the most holy place as these people have in mind, but maybe an even greater one. One because it's going to be kind of confusing if you say that this should be a new most holy place when we get to the end of this, right? Because what did it say happened? Dunzo, right?
How would the heavenly one be anointed?
Or the most holy place be anointed. I would say that there's going to talk about an anointed one or a Messiah to come, right? But if we're talking about a place, anointing being this idea of dedication, right, for a specific purpose, and purification as well. So it's kind of the idea that there's a most holy place that is going to be dedicated and rededicated, but not probably as Daniel has in mind here.
Hebrews 9:23 through 25 or 25 would kind of get to that idea.
Give me the sense of it. Not necessarily, we don't have time to read it, but give us the sense of what you mean.
He just got done saying Moses had to sprinkle the old tabernacle with blood of animal sacrifices, and that dedicated that. Now, Jesus is going into the true holy place with his blood and purifying and
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that's absolutely true and contained in this picture here. We also have even just, not to pull too much on Colossians, but what is the dwelling place of God in Colossians, or of Christ, if you will? In you, right? So anointing a new temple, those that might be anointed by his blood, and then have him dwelling in us. So this is all kind of, I think, being the most important part that we should be taking away here, that what Gabriel is talking about and what Daniel did understand is these things being accomplished. Now, it's kind of in this almost backwards seeming way, right? So we have a number of different ways that we can interpret these different sets of years. If you're reading in the ESV, which I think that's probably the most people here, I will say there is a little bit different reading in how the ESV renders the end of 25. It says, from the going out of the word to restore and rebuild Jerusalem to the coming of anointed one, a prince, there shall be 7 weeks, and it has a period. Then for 62 weeks it will be built again with squares and yada yada. The original is a little bit more ambiguous. If you got NASB and the NIV also went with this, it's really just there shall be 7 weeks. And 62 weeks, it will be built again. So you have this idea of 7 weeks, maybe that's one period, or maybe it's just 7 and 62 for this total 69-year period, just one week, if you will, short of the full 70-year period. So just keep that in mind as we go through this. So I do want to bring out kind of walk you quickly through these 4 different views that there are of this time period. You've got this Maccabean idea, which I think has a lot of makes a lot of historical sense. But it's going to say this 490 years is from Jeremiah's original prophecy, and saying that's what's meant by the word going out, till the 2nd century BC, where you have Antiochus IV, who we've already been talking about in chapter 8, and saying ultimate completion of that is with what Antiochus does to the temple. He goes in, he offers pig's flesh on the altar. He desecrates it. You would have this idea of sacrifice being stopped for a period of time. And that kind of views that being the end of that 490 years, which fits a lot of things. You have this idea of a church age understanding, which each segment then is completely symbolic, where you've got this initial period, and then I'll kind of show you where we would be in this 62-week period, where it's just all symbolic, but would span from Cyrus all the way to the final judgment. This dispensational view, which is kind of odd, and I can't wrap my head around really, but it's a way to kind of force it to be really, really literal, but then you get to the time of Christ, and it just says, and then you actually just put pause there, and we're just in this indefinite pause until it picks back up. And then the messianic kind of understanding of this, where you have the 490 years as symbolic, and I wish I had gone back and changed this. I would say approximate, as opposed to symbolic. Yes, there's symbolism in it, but it also does fit approximately as far as the time periods, but then would more point to the destruction of the temple and of Jerusalem in 70 AD. To kind of show you that here, this Maccabean view, which we learn about it from the Maccabean writings, but this would start then from 587 in Jeremiah's prophecy, and fits really nicely with 70 weeks for this time period right here. But then the 62 weeks from Cyrus' decree to what they would say, what you would say is this anointed one that it's going to talk about, that gets cut off. It doesn't quite fit the number of years, but still, we could say this is going approximately, though it's quite a bit less. But you have this Onias figure who would have actually been the last high priest of the proper lineage, pretty much the last true high priest that you could have of Zadok's line, who is assassinated. And then from this period on for a number of years, you have this where Antiochus is persecuting. And then partway through that, you would have the temple being desecrated. And then he finally is ousted, and judgment would then come on him, and the temple is rededicated. So the first period and the last period fit really nicely for that. And what actually happens historically fits nicely for this. However, we don't have the whole city getting destroyed, right? Or the temple getting utterly destroyed like we do here, like we see here. So maybe fits, maybe not quite. The traditional view, which is really what you're going to kind of hear the most, and I think we all are going to say it must have at least final fulfillment in this. You have this beginning from the decree of Cyrus, the 7-week period, or would be 49 years, being pretty approximate and landing somewhere in between the temple being, I don't know why I'm doing a laser at that as if you guys could see that. Sorry. This time period going to somewhere in between the temple being rebuilt and Jerusalem being rebuilt. And then the 62 weeks spanning from that's somewhere in between their period to around the time where Jesus is born, and then you have the Messiah cut off at the end of that 69 total weeks here. And then you have the rest of this time would be until Jerusalem is destroyed. None of those fit perfectly on the number of weeks, but it does fit kind of approximate time periods and kind of fit with what we see happening. You also have this church age view where everything is symbolic. I don't like this because then it's pretty much like the years have no meaning at all other than their symbolism. And that doesn't really fit with prophecy in my mind. So didn't want to take a whole lot of time with that. Still probably took too much on it. But of these four, I didn't mention yet, didn't talk about one. Of those positions, what kind of corresponds best with those with the 6 goals of the prophecy, really makes most sense with this messianic fulfillment, right? Or you could say even the church age. But you also, considering the importance of pattern, that Maccabean view really fits nicely as far as what actually happens historically down to the detail. My stance on this, I'll tell you, and you can take it or leave it, is really that the answer is both, right? People living in that time where Onias is killed and under Antiochus' persecution would have looked at this and said, good, there's going to be an end to this. We aren't going to stay in this time period forever. And it is going to come to an end. And they would have looked at Daniel 8 for that. They would have looked at Daniel 11 for that. They would have seen this as well. However, then you get to Jesus, and what does he describe? When he's talking about the destruction of Jerusalem, he says, when you see the abomination of desolation standing in the temple, okay, that's your sign, get out of town. So Jesus picks up the same language and applies it onto the destruction of Jerusalem. So we know it's going to have fulfillment there. So I think if we take this really as the pattern, we're going to be able to see fulfillment in both of these as a pattern for God bringing full completion to what he has prophesied for these people. Remember, these people were looking, and when you read the prophecies from long before, it sounds a whole lot like you're going to get back into the land and everything's going to be restored and the Messiah is going to be there and everything's boom, all at once, right? And now he's, kind of playing out this now but not yet fulfillment throughout Daniel. And as we see here, it's going to play out over a period of time. Okay. So then let's get into a little bit more of the actual prophecy. So what is going to happen in this 70th week according to the prophecy? We've got this idea of, yes, the city is going to be rebuilt and it's going to have a moat and squares before you get to the 70th week. But what's the time period going to be like when Jerusalem and the temple are rebuilt? Yeah, times of trouble. And I mean, if you look through kind of the intertestamental period, lots of times of trouble, right? Whatever end point we're looking at, it's times of trouble through all of that. And then what's going to happen before this, or I guess when the 70th week begins, at the end of the 69 weeks? Look at verse 26 here first. Okay, the Messiah or anointed one shall be cut off. So, yeah, if we're taking just the straight up Messiah view, yeah, this would be looking at Jesus being cut off. That's the idea of being killed, by the way. It's not just shunned or ousted. The NIV goes ahead and says that, killed. So if we just take a more general anointed one, that could also apply to that Onias figure that was killed earlier on, but definitely also can apply to the Messiah. And then what happens after that, though? When I'm reading this, especially after you go through all these goals of the prophecy, I'm expecting him to say that she'll cut off and have nothing, but then the sanctuary will be established and all the evil will be cut out. But what do the people of the prince do then?
Destroy the city and the sanctuary.
Right? Kind of surprising to probably to Daniel, who's looking for the restoration of the temple. And he's actually saying the end of this is going to be that it's going to be destroyed. This prince person that we're talking about here could be maybe another ruler that's going to be brought in. But when you think of Jesus, who does Jesus say is bringing judgment on Jerusalem ultimately? Yeah. So you're going to see the Son of Man riding on the clouds doing this. So I think either way, yes, we know it's an outside force, an outside ruler is brought in to do that, but you can take this even to mean the people appointed by this prince, this same Messiah that we're talking about, are going to exact ultimate destruction on the temple and the sanctuary here. We've talked a little bit, we'll go ahead and go down through this. Yeah, so we'll have the Messiah cut off, the people of the prince coming and destroying, and that's kind of surprising. And it doesn't seem like an answer to Daniel's prayer unless, kind of like we alluded to before in that anointing of a most holy place, this is for the purpose of having a better temple, having the perfect fulfillment of what the temple would be and what Jerusalem would be in us as his people. So then what does this idea of 70 weeks represent? Remember, what typically happened after 7 periods of 7? That 50th year. Yeah, you have the year of Jubilee coming after 7 periods of 7. And so that idea of 70 times 7 is like the Jubilee of Jubilees, right? So what this is going toward in a Jew that reads 77s is thinking of this idea of Jubilee, but multiplied by as much as you could, right? And that's kind of going to be the idea of what is going to come after this. And then we see in Luke 4, when Jesus gets up in front of the synagogue and reads from Isaiah. Let's read what it says there. Luke chapter 4, verse 16 through 21. It sounds a lot like Jubilee, where you're going to have the return of the land, return of slaves. The land gets a second year off in a row. And so Jesus reads from Isaiah, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captives, the recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, and proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." So you have Jesus, in a way, announcing himself as this ultimate Jubilee that's coming, which kind of gives a lot of credence to the idea that this is fulfilling that 490 years in him, in a way. And also, through this idea of the Messiah being cut off, actually, remember the goals of this. The Messiah being cut off is actually what is going to bring in everlasting righteousness and make an end to sin, to finish transgression. And kind of we had talked about before, how is the anointing a most holy place? And now the most holy place where God's going to dwell is going to be in and among his people, rather than a physical city and temple. And then what's going to happen during this last week? Let me summarize what's happening there. Well, we have this destruction of the temple happening. We've got desolations decreed. In the end, there shall be war through this time period. There's going to be this covenant made with many for a week, but for half of that week, there's going to be an end to sacrifice and offering. And the ultimate thing is, on the wing of abominations comes this one that's going to be making desolate, right? As we've already talked about already, this can fit with Antiochus, especially with the details of stopping sacrifice and that kind of thing. But it also definitely fits with the destruction of Jerusalem by the general Titus in AD 70. And again, that would be stopping sacrifices and desecrating the temple as he takes everything out of it. Maybe not like offering pig's flesh on it. So both of these can kind of fulfill this. But the really, really important thing is right at the very end, because what's going to happen to that one that brings this desolation? Very end of the chapter. Yeah. And until the decreed end is poured out on the desolator, right? So no matter all that's going to happen, Daniel, which this doesn't sound great, the one that brings this is going to have destruction poured out on them. But remember, the purpose of all of this, it may not sound like it right now, but it's going to bring an end to sin. It's going to bring in everlasting judgment. It's going to fulfill all of this prophecy and bring an ultimate end to it. That was a lot. So I'd love to know questions or anything that jumps out to you. And I don't know that I have answer for it. So I will direct those questions straight back to Nathan and to Byron. But any questions you have that jump out in your mind about this? See, I knew it was impossible to talk about this in 15 minutes. But what's that?
Poor Daniel. I think he's looking for something better. He's at the end of his life, and he's praying about this and wanting so much for the temple to be rebuilt, for the people to be restored, for there to be good things happen back home. He's not getting it.
Yeah, I mean, he does get the future promised hope, right? But it's not probably happening on the timeline that he wants, or maybe in the way that he has in mind, right? And that's going to continue, because I mean, he's already been talking about all these terrible things that Antiochus is going to come in and do. So he's not a stranger to the idea that it isn't just poof, everything's perfect now, right? Anything else? Or other things to add to this?
Idea that Daniel's faced with coming to terms with God's timing, I guess. And we can take application of that too. Think of what Peter writes, in terms of the coming judgment of God, people looking around and saying, it's not happening because look at all the time that's gone by. And yet we see with God's restoration, it's going to happen in his time and according to his purposes. And I think that 490 again points to just that. Because even after the time of Jesus, and he comes and brings in all these goals, well, we look around us and the world's still broken.
Yeah.
Fix everything? Well, yes, but also no, we still have that hope of the ultimate fulfillment of things, which really even Daniel and should we see from this too, is there's hope even if we haven't seen it yet.
Absolutely. I think that's really what we need to take away from this, because there's still ultimate fulfillment of these purposes that Gabriel talks about here to be gotten to, right? An end may have been made to sin in the fact that Jesus has died for it and atoned for it, but man, I wish it had made an end to it in my life right now. We still have tribulation to go through to get there. The restoration is going to be in God's timing. Thank you for that, Daniel. Whenever I'm teaching Daniel with Nathan, I keep on wanting to call him Daniel. Anyway, so I hope that's as clear as mud. Whatever exact details fall out with this, ultimately, we've got a pattern here that plays itself out in a couple different ways, but ultimately is with the purpose of this ultimate jubilee for the people of God. We've got some time left. Let's go ahead and jump into chapter 10. This one's fun. We probably won't get quite as far as I had hoped to here, but we'll at least get far enough into this to where Nathan can maybe get through 11 after that. Lots of history happening there. Anyway, so let's jump into chapter 10 here, beginning with verse 1 down through 9. I'll go ahead and read it for the sake of time. In the third year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a word was revealed to Daniel, who was named Belteshazzar. And the word was true, and it was a great conflict. And he understood the word and had understanding of the vision. Just to get in your head, this statement right here, the timestamp and everything, verse 1, is the summary of everything that happens in the rest of the book. The rest of the book is this vision that he's summarizing right now, or the prophecy that's given to him following this vision. So in verse 2, in those days I, Daniel, was mourning for 3 weeks. I ate no delicacies, no meat or wine entered my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all for 3 full weeks. On the 24th day of the first month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, that is the Tigris, I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a man clothed in linen, with a belt of fine gold from Uphaz around his waist. His body was like beryl, his face like the appearance of lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his arms and legs like the gleam of burnished bronze, and the sound of his words like the sound of a multitude. And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for the men who were with me did not see the vision. But a great trembling fell upon them, and they fled to hide themselves. So I was left alone and saw this great vision, and no strength was left in me. My radiant appearance was fearfully changed, and I retained no strength. Then I heard the sound of his words, and as I heard the sound of his words, I fell on my face in a deep sleep with my face to the ground. Okay, so what's our historical marker given here? Okay, so the third year of Cyrus, which would put this how long after Daniel 9 has happened? Yeah, so which would have been the first year of Cyrus. So something like 2-3 years after this, we have this vision coming, right? We've got Cyrus, and remember, what would Daniel's position have been in the government at this period of time? Yeah. So remember, after Daniel in the lion's den, after that, he's put as head or third in command, or one of 3 commissioners or leaders of the people. This idea, and over all of the wise people, if you will. And yeah, so this would have been after Daniel in the lion's den has happened. Remember, he was praying then, and what would also be going on now? If this is the third year of Cyrus, remember in the first year of Cyrus, the decree goes out to go back and rebuild the temple, right? Yeah, so the first exile have gone back. Rebuilding should be underway. So that's kind of the overall backdrop that we have here, and we'll get into a couple things as far as what that might mean. But what's Daniel's? What does it say? Does he understand this vision? Why might it point out that he understood this vision? What was that?
It says he did.
It says he did. Did he understand one of the previous visions? No. Yeah, remember chapter 8? He's like, I had no idea what that meant, and luckily Gabriel came and explained it to me. And then to us, it was like, and that still feels clear as mud. Anyway, so this is a true message, but it's also one of great conflict. What kind of conflict is this about? Is this just physical conflict? We'll hear about later. We'll find out. So this time he understands the vision in contrast to 8. It says he's mourning and fasting, and sounds like, usually somebody like him is mourning and fasting. He's probably doing what? He's probably praying, right? Maybe doing kind of like what we saw him doing in chapter 9. Why might, in the 3rd year of the reign of Cyrus, Daniel be mourning in sackcloth and ashes, praying to God? It's a little bit of reading between the lines that we got to do here. But what would be going on right now for Daniel's people? Yeah, if we look at Ezra, how are the first few years of rebuilding the temple going? Just great, right? Pretty terrible. It isn't happening at this time. It's being thwarted at every turn, and still is for a while after this. So could be Daniel has heard about this, right? And knows about how the rebuilding is going, and is praying to God and in mourning. So that could be part of why this is happening here. So who does he see in this vision? Okay. You're going there. I like it. But let's back up a little bit before we say that, right? Because what is it? Let's describe, who is this person that he sees? Well, I gave a little bit of it away. Is this person he sees a man, right? And not one in the likeness of a man, or not one that kind of maybe seemed like a man, or kind of like the children of man. We're going to see some other descriptions, but it just says a man, right? And but then he goes on to describe, and you're like, wow, this is not like any man that I've ever seen. Because how is he described? Throw some out there. Shout some out. Yeah, face like lightning. Wow. If looks could kill. No. What's that? And eyes. Okay, so you have this brightness. His face is like lightning. His eyes are like torches or flaming fires. What else? Yeah, so he's got gleaming arms like burnished bronze. Absolutely. What else? What's he wearing? Linen? Yeah. Yeah, and so linen and a gold belt, right?
Honor.
What's that?
Honor. Men who wore linen and gold belts. Fine linen or above it.
And all, there's a specific station of people that wore linen. Yeah, so it's also like a priest's garb. Yeah, this is somebody, that has some priestly qualities here, wearing this. Absolutely. What else? Anything else you see in this description?
His voice.
Yes, his voice, which is like what?
It says it sounds like a multitude.
The sound of his words like the sound of a multitude. Wow. And sounds like it was pretty scary. So who is this person, right? So there is similar language used of God in Ezekiel 1. If we look at verse 26, I'll just read it for you. Oh man, if I can get there quicker. Wow, that took me way too long. In verse 26, verse 27, and or end of verse 26, was a likeness on the throne was a likeness with a human appearance, and upward from what had the appearance of his waist, I saw it was as it were gleaming metal, like the appearance of fire enclosed all around, and downward from what had been the appearance of his waist, I saw as it were the appearance of fire, and there was brightness all around him, like the brightness of a bow that is in the cloud on the day of rain. So was the appearance of the brightness all around. So that's the likeness of the glory of God that Ezekiel sees there. Some similarity, there's this man in Ezekiel 9. There's a man in linen that God tells to go and mark the people who are grieved by the sin in the land. Pretty much those, marking people for salvation there. And he's wearing linen, kind of like this individual is. The biggest similarity, and probably why Andre jumps right to it's Jesus, right? If we look at Revelation chapter 1, which we don't want to read forward into this. They didn't have Revelation to turn to, right? However, Revelation is maybe drawing on this picture here in Daniel, and we know that that's who John is looking at. Revelation chapter 1, verse 12, then I turned to see the voice that was speaking to me, and on turning I saw 7 golden lampstands. In the midst of the lampstands stood one like the Son of Man, so it looks like a man, clothed with a long robe with a golden sash around his chest. The hairs of his head were white, like white wool, like snow. Remember the Ancient of Days, by the way, in Daniel. White hair, white robe, too. His eyes were like a flame of fire. His feet were like burnished bronze. There you go. Refined in a furnace. And what else? His voice was like the roar of many waters. So very similar, right? Eerily similar. This person that's in front of him. So maybe this is... there's some that looks like descriptions of God. There's some that looks like what we know of the glorified Jesus later. Maybe to figure out this further, what happened to even just the people around Daniel? They couldn't see it or anything, but just this presence here fills them with dread, right? They're terrified. They go running away. They can feel the presence even if they can't see it or hear these things. So pretty strong reaction. Is that similar to any other appearance of a heavenly being that we know of now? Yeah, sounds kind of like Saul on the road to Damascus, right? The people around him couldn't hear it, but they're filled with dread and running off, and they're all scared and all of this. Kind of might give a little bit more credence to that idea that, maybe this could be God or Jesus or maybe the pre-incarnated Christ before, though oddly I'll say Daniel's actually somehow been able to see the post-incarnated Christ in chapter 7, right? The one like the Son of Man comes then, so I don't think we can say beyond a shadow of a doubt, but let's then look at how does Daniel react to it? Yeah, so what's been Daniel's reaction to other angels coming in front of him in this? The man Gabriel showed up. We started talking, right? So this is a very different reaction here. What does it say happened to him? Okay, so it knocks him unconscious, right? By the end of it. Before that happens, what does it say happens to him? Yeah, that's one translation there. Absolutely. ESV, my radiant appearance was fearfully changed, and I retained no strength. Another, that's literally that my splendor was changed to ruin. Right? I was here and then I was here, right? And remember, he was already mourning. He didn't have much splendor then. And he's turned to ruin and has no strength left in him. He looks like he's dead, right? You have this, and by the way, pretty much the same thing happens to John when in Revelation, right? And especially when in contrast to this very special man, Daniel, hardly even looks like a man anymore. So he sleeps, he's knocked out, just kind of similar to what we saw before in chapter 8. And then we're going to have to leave a cliffhanger for Nathan to pick up with here, because we're going to see a very similar image. Verse 10, a hand touches him and sets him on his hands and knees and speaks to him and strengthens and encourages him. So we're going to pick up with that at our next Daniel class. Before we go, though, I do want to just bring out and be sure we leave with the lessons that we can walk away from this. One, no matter what it looks like around us or the desolations and terrible things, ultimate jubilee is coming for the people of God. It's going to be in God's timeline. It's not always going to look like we want it or expect it to, but it is coming. And then also the whole point, I think, much of the point that we're going to see, we've seen in the end of 9 and in through chapter 10 and the rest of the book, is that God has engineered history. It is in his book. It is going to be on his timeline. And we can have faith and trust in that. Thank you for this class. I appreciate you bearing with me. This is something that's somewhat new to me studying, so I appreciate you hanging in with me here. And I'm going to punt to Daniel, to Nathan, to Daniel. I'm going to let Daniel teach the rest of this. We'll just sit and read the book, right? Thank you all.